I really enjoy all parts of the writing process, each in their own way, but there is really something exciting and fun and full of potential when it comes to starting a book from scratch. Even more so if you're a brand new writer. So, in this episode of the How to Be an Author podcast, we're going to be talking about how to start a book absolutely from scratch, whether you are a brand new writer or a seasoned author. And yeah, there's some differences in the way that seasoned authors start their book, and that's because they know that they actually do need to plan. I think that planning is one of those really important things that you can do. So today we're going to be talking about how to finally pull the trigger. And if you missed last week's episode, that was all about procrastination and resistance. Now it's going to be how to finally leap into this whole book writing thing to finally go from being just a writer to being a published author. This is the first step in your journey. And so we're going to be talking about more of the mindset things and more of the things that you need in terms of setting yourself up for success. And then that way, that's going to pave the way so that next week we can start talking more about story level things, how we can tell what makes a good story, how we can pick the story spine, picking tense and point of view, outlines, world building, all of that fun stuff. But I think it's really important today to lay the foundations. And so this is going to be super useful to you, whether you have never done this before or whether you've done it 10 times before. I think you're going to be getting some really useful information on that.
If you're a writer dreaming of becoming a successful author, join me, writing coach Karenna Akavane, on the How to Be an Author podcast, your weekly source for writing information, inspiration, and motivation.
So today when we're talking about what to do to start a book from scratch, the really most important thing to do first is to get our mindset in the right place. I always say that the crucial thing for any writer to do before they start writing a book to set themselves up for success is making it so that they can believe that they can do it. If you don't believe that at some point you can actually do this whole book writing thing, your chances of success are vastly lower. And believing that you can do it takes a lot more than you might think. It's not just flipping a switch. It's really setting yourself up so that it seems like it's at least figure outable. Setting yourself up so that you can actually see which steps are required. Setting yourself up so that if there's something you don't know, you actually identify that thing so that you can learn the key things you need so that it doesn't seem so daunting and impossible. This is so important. And I can't state it enough. I know so many writers who actually get tripped up because they were chugging along, they were doing great, and then they hit that first little roadblock, that first moment where they're like, wow, this character isn't developing the way they should, and I don't know how character development works. Or, wow, I thought I was going to do third person point of view, and now I wanted to do first, but now I'm super tripped up and confused, and I'm really lost. Or, hey, I actually don't know anything about how the publishing industry works, or I don't know how to do this or that, and they get totally stuck. Now, I'm not saying that you need to know absolutely everything about book writing upfront, because you don't. That can be overwhelming in its own unique way as well. Here's a little secret about things that you need to know about writing. It's just like world building. When you're world building and you know all these details and you are so tempted to put them all in at once, that's not great. The only details that go into your book are the ones that are useful at that very point in the story. And the same goes for things you need to know about writing and about the publishing industry. You only need them when you need them. So why get overwhelmed up front? Of course, some people say the more you know, the better. So yes, I think that when we're starting out, if we want to give ourselves a higher chance of success, if we want to have the opportunity to really have this go somewhere, there are some things we need to do mindset wise, setting ourselves up so that we feel that, yes, we're able to do it. And also in terms of our knowledge and also in terms of our motivation, our inspiration, we're going to be talking about all of those things today. So let's start off talking about what are my chances of success? So many new writers ask this question, and I feel that they ask it as almost a preemptive excuse. It's almost like they want you to say, your chances of success are so slim. Give up now. And that's not the truth. Your chances of success are astronomically higher if you give yourself the opportunity to do all of those things that you need to do. There are no shortcuts, but there are more direct routes for sure. And also if you get out of your own way. So a lot of writers will trip themselves up. A lot of writers will self-sabotage. A lot of writers will do things to hurt their chances of success. And so if you don't do those things, your chances of success are higher. People always say, oh, there's so many gatekeepers and only so-and-so percentage of books written actually goes anywhere. And if you really think about it, those numbers are actually quite encouraging. Think about the fact that even, let's look at an event like NaNoWriMo. When you have NaNoWriMo, you have about 400,000 or more writers trying to write a book. And of those people for NaNoWriMo on any given year, about 10% actually make it to the finish line, which I find is huge actually. So that's 10% of 400,000. Okay, and they're not the only people writing a book, but let's just go with this number as an example. So 10% of those people win NaNoWriMo. But wait, that doesn't mean that they've finished a book. That means that they have 50,000 words. Most books out there, most fiction books, are twice that length. So let's be a little bit negative, but realistic. And let's say that of the 10% of 400,000, so of the 40,000 who actually won NaNoWriMo, I'm not even going to say that some people lied about winning. We'll just pretend they were all sincere. But of those people, I would say that approximately half that probably added to the 50,000 words to finally get a full-length novel. So we cut that in half, so we're now at 20,000 writers. Great. Of those writers, how many do you think actually polish that work up, have it edited, rewrite it enough to where they feel that they're ready to either publish it or try to query an agent? That's a much smaller percentage, actually. I know for a fact that that is less than 50%. That's probably closer to 10%, right? So we had our 20,000 people who'd finished the book. Now we're going to do 10% of that. So we've got 2,000 people who now have an edited book that is ready for querying or it's ready for self-publishing. But of those people, how many people have done their homework and actually do either the self-publishing process or the querying process properly? Again, 10%. So you see how the numbers dwindle without even needing any gatekeepers. This is before anybody starts rejecting anyone. So you see how there's so many things that you can do to increase your chances of success, from selecting a great story idea that'll sell. And we're going to be talking about that in next week's episode. Or having your mindset in the right place, setting up productive writing habits, setting up a writing community that's going to support you along the way. All of those things are raising your chances of being a success as an author. I also think that if you learn the things you need to learn. So you need to know a minimum of things about the publishing industry, not so that you get scared at how difficult it might be for it to work, but you need to realize those non-negotiable pieces of your job as a writer. One of the non-negotiables is writing a story that's readable, i.e., writing a story that a reader will not only want to read, but be able to read and comprehend. This sounds obvious, but so many writers write something that's so scrambled that no one can actually delve into it properly. They can't actually read it and comprehend it. And they're not willing to go get it edited so that it can be fixed. And those things end up ruining your chances of success. So that's one of the things you need to know. For the publishing industry, for the publishing to work, you need to have a story that's readable. Another key thing you need to know is, who is my ideal reader? Why do you need to know this? Not only because it's going to impact the way you write your story, the tone, the style, the point of view, but it's also going to impact how you market and advertise your book. That's right. You need to market your book. And that's another key thing that you need to know before you start. You need to have something of a plan when it comes to how you're going to get your book into the hot little hands of your ideal reader. Whether you plan on publishing conventionally or self-publishing, you need to do some part of the promotion that is expected. You're expected to have an author platform, and we'll be having lots more episodes about author platforms in the future. And I'll try to add a few things about your author platform here and there, even in episodes that aren't really geared towards that, because I feel like that's one of the big shortcomings that many authors have, is building their author platform in a good way. But finding that ideal reader, starting to think about marketing, starting to think about the stylistics of how you're telling your story. And I talked about conventional versus self-publishing. If you don't know what those things are and how those options differ, it is time to definitely start to learn what that means, because that's going to be a big decision for you, whether you choose to publish conventionally or self-publish. That's going to really determine a lot of the steps that you have to take as you move forward in your journey to go from aspiring writer to successful author. And I'll be having a lot of episodes about that as well, about the publishing process, whether you're doing it yourself or whether you're doing conventionally. So we're not going to talk about that too much here, but if a little alarm bell went off in your head when you heard me talking about that and you were like, oh no, I don't know what conventional publishing actually is these days, or if you have these very old ideas of how the publishing industry works, just know that it is changing at light speed. And so the things that were true a couple years ago, many of those things aren't true anymore today. So you really want to keep on top of industry news. I think that's really, really crucial. Another thing that I want you to do to keep that mindset of yours really healthy, to keep the obstacles from popping up, is that I need you to build some bulletproof motivation. And how do you build motivation? It has to be internal motivation, because if you are not internally motivated to write this book, and of course, your motivation is going to flag once in a while. Your motivation is going to have its ups and downs. That's completely normal and expected, but without bulletproof internal motivation, it's going to be very hard for you to power through, especially in the difficult moments of writing the book, when the initial excitement wears off, or when you're doing your umpteenth edit and you're starting to get really sick of this. All of those things require a lot of internal motivation, because if you try to power through without internal motivation, you're going to burn out. Just having that mindset that is built so that you know that you are bulletproof despite the fact that you have a few obstacles and that you have some tough moments, that's going to be key in avoiding burnout. It's just like when you're on a diet and you're trying to push through on pure willpower. You know how hard that is. Pure willpower will not take you there. You need internal motivation. So how do you find internal motivation? You have to find your why. We talked about in the previous episodes, what does being a writer look like for you? Why did you start to think you wanted to be a writer or an author? Was that realistic or not? So find your why. Go back to that motivation of yours, why you want to do this thing called writing, why you want to be an author, why you've picked such a difficult road. You have to be really cognizant of the fact that You've chosen a difficult road. It's not easy, but it is rewarding. So find your why. I know that I write because I find it magical. I write because I find it so rewarding. I write because it helps me to connect with people in ways that I wouldn't be able to otherwise. I write because I'm a little bit of an introvert who likes to stay at home, making up invented worlds. And I like to delve into those things. And I like to delve into stories of people who are dropped into a world that wasn't necessarily their own. I love that. That really motivates me. And it not only motivates me to write, but it also motivates me to find other stories that I love. And I kind of up my motivation when I've lost my why for a minute. Sometimes I reevaluate because our why can change. Our reason for wanting to do this can change. We can start out wanting to do it because we find it fun. And then we start doing it because we start to feel that it's rewarding. And then we can still be doing it because maybe it's financially rewarding. So our reasons for doing things and our motivation can absolutely change along the way. That's a very normal thing. But I think that it's important to keep reminding yourself of why it is that you are where you are doing the thing you're doing. Another thing that I really recommend when you're starting on this journey is keep reading. So many newer writers think, okay, well, I'm starting with a writing thing. I don't have any time. Let me stop reading. And I think that's a really big mistake. I think that reading is such a pleasure. It keeps you in the world of writing and writers. It keeps you a little bit more objective about how your writing fits in to the canon of everything that's being published right now. So I think it really helps you to be able to produce stuff that's a little bit more commercially viable. Now, I understand that you're an artist as a writer, but a book is also a product. A book needs to find readers. A book is something that you need to sell. And hence, if you want to sell a book, that means it needs to inherently be commercial. And sometimes that's a really tough lesson to learn for writers. But I think that being completely cognizant of the fact that your book is a product that needs to work for your reader. So it needs to be readable. It needs to be fun. It needs to fit into their expectations. That's something that you should not lose track of when you're thinking about this whole writing thing. So reading, I think, is both reward and research, and I think you should definitely do that a lot. Now, make things easier for yourself. That is, after you've gotten your mindset in the right place, let's talk about making this writing thing easier. That's right. We talked about resistance last week. How do you overcome resistance? You overcome it by taking obstacles out of your way, by making things easier on yourself. So think to yourself, what are the toughest things that I anticipate happening in this whole writing project? Where are the things where I think I'm going to have a problem? Not just story-wise, because we'll be talking more about that next week, but in terms of the time that I have, in terms of flagging motivation, in terms of the different steps that I'm going to need to go through. How do you eliminate the pain points? How do you eliminate the pain in the butt points? Well, examine that really closely and look at that in detail. So one of the things that I would recommend that really is going to make your life easier as you start to write this book is join a writing group. And I'll probably have a whole episode on joining a writing group in the future. But for now, suffice it to say that joining a writing group sounds like it might be more trouble than it's worth. You may have heard of a lot of writing groups that are very exclusive or that are very critical or that people are not very kind or that you end up feeling like, you don't belong there. But if you find a supportive writing group of people who are willing to give you space to share your work, or who are willing to answer questions that you may have, or who are just willing to be there when you need them, a writing group can be such a gift. I know that ever since I started my writing group, I've learned so much from my writers. I think more than I've taught them, but maybe they'll beg to differ, which I almost hope, but I also love that they learn so much from each other. And our writing group is very supportive. We have people who are regulars. We have people who come in and out. And all writing groups are different. But if you find one that's a good fit, that means that you're not going to feel so isolated. That means that you're going to feel that, you're not alone and you have answers to your burning questions. And that if you need an ear, if you need somebody to give you a quick critique of something, you're going to have those people. And then when you need beta readers, you're going to have those people. So that takes out a lot of the obstacles, of, hey, I don't know if this actually works. Well, if you had a writing group, you would. You would know what works and what doesn't work because you're sharing with them every single week or every single month. So another thing you can do to make things easier on yourself is making writing into a habit. And I know that so many writers who recommend to new writers what to do in order to become an author, they say write every day. And I mentioned a couple of weeks ago that I think that that's problematic. Writing every day might not be realistic for some of us, especially when we're very new to this writing thing. However, it is important to establish a writing habit. That's a different animal than being sitting there writing every single day. Writing a habit means that you're going to be writing more often than not. Having a writing habit means that writing is always in the back of your mind. Having a writing habit is that writing becomes part of your identity. Having a writing habit is that you actually make time and space for your writing. So I mentioned time and space. So being able to create a habit means that, you need to set aside time and space for your writing. How do you do that? And why do you do that? The time is crucial, first of all. Many of us are so busy in this modern world and we're like, I don't have any time for anything else. But baby, you do. You actually do. Even if it's just a single 5-minute writing sprint each day, do you know how much progress you would make if you gave yourself the gift of those 5 minutes to devote to writing? It would become an absolute habit. Then you might be one of those people who writes every single day. So how can you find time for writing? Too many people talk about making the time, and it sounds so daunting. I'm talking about finding those little scraps of time that have been left by the wayside, those empty little moments where maybe you're just vegging out, or maybe you're just looking at social media, or maybe you're thinking about which snack you're going to eat. And those moments could be dedicated to writing. And it would be so much easier if you allotted yourself the space for it as well, because that'll be so much easier. Now, if you don't have a dedicated writing space, that means that every single time you want to write, you're going to have to set yourself up. You're going to have to plug in your laptop. You're going to have to settle in. You're going to have to get into a comfortable position. You're going to have to get whichever accessories you need, your notebook, your pen. You're going to have to log on, do all this stuff. And that actually creates a bunch of little mini roadblocks between you and this writing habit that you want to establish. So if you have a dedicated space for writing, that means that you're kind of conditioned that the minute you sit down at this writing desk or at this table or whatever it is that you've kind of devoted to your writing, your brain goes into that mode where it's like, oh, here we are in my writing space and everything's here that I need in my writing space. So now I can start writing, and you're going to spare yourself, even if it's a couple minutes. That is a huge amount when you're a busy person trying to develop a writing habit. The other thing you can do is when you break things into steps, and we're going to be talking a lot more about this in this whole podcast, because I really think that breaking things into steps is one of the best ways of making those things less daunting, less huge, less overwhelming. But when you've learned how to break things into steps and that becomes a habit, you can start saying, okay, you know what? I don't feel up to this step today, but since I know that the step after that one is this, I'm going to skip and I'm going to do this step. And that can really help you, especially if you're ADHD, if you have a hard time concentrating on things, if you're not feeling motivated, if something's scaring you, you can definitely skip steps and then come back when you're in the right headspace, because we're in a different headspace every day. That is normal that some days you're feeling more like writing than others. Some days your head's in it, some days it's not in it. And all of that is really, really normal. So I think that you just need to be really cognizant of that, and it's going to help out. So now let's get more into this nitty-gritty of what do we do at the very, very beginning? We're about to start a book. We've kind of instructed ourselves on what publishing is. We've figured out a little bit the type of thing that we want to write because we've been reading, and so we know kind of which genre maybe we want to write. And if we don't know that, we can be experimenting a little bit before we nail something down, because between us just vaguely thinking, I want to be a writer, and then thinking, I'm writing this particular story, there's a whole transition that needs to happen. We're going to be talking more about that in detail next week, but let's talk about this week what you can be doing to really figure out how to commit to one story. And next week, we'll be talking about what makes a good story. But this week, I don't want you to think too much about rules, and I don't want you to think too much about the complexities of these things. I want you to surprise and delight yourself. So I want you to read and then maybe write in your journal or, just kind of do writing sprints of trying different genres, trying different subjects. People talk about pantsers versus plotters. And these are the people who either write by the seat of their pants, completely by instinct, or the plotters who actually plan things. Okay, at this stage in the game, I think you should be a pantser. I think you should be playing. I think you should be writing whatever you want so that you can surprise yourself with a new direction maybe, or with a new subject. I think you should be brainstorming plots and characters and locations. Just brainstorming. Don't throw anything out yet. This is a moment where you're amassing the possibilities. I want you to really be getting absolutely, literally drunk on the possibilities of what you can actually produce with this book. Because next week, we're going to be starting to focus a little bit more. We're going to be paring things down. But this week, just collect, have fun, see the possibilities, see what you can do, dream about it, because soon enough, the reality is going to hit and you're going to have to be doing more actual work. Right now, this is creative play. So really enjoy that part of it. This is one of the really fun stages of writing a book. I'd mentioned a little bit at the beginning of this podcast the difference between how seasoned authors start a book and how new authors start a book. And I'd kind of hinted at the fact that seasoned authors are much more aware of the fact that they need to have a plan. And yes, that's very true. But now that we've heard everything about how to plan, how to start thinking about pulling the trigger, how to get our mindset in the right place, how to establish the things that we need so that we can build a good writing habit, all of those things. Now let's just talk about how seasoned authors are different. Seasoned authors, not only do they know that they need a plan, but they have experience behind them. So if you're a seasoned author, your last book had some things that worked really well, and it had some things that didn't work as much. There were some things that you enjoyed and that really were great, and then there are things that you're like, never again. So unlike the brand new author whose sky is the limit, right? They have nothing, they don't know anything different than to just kind of think in every direction at once. A seasoned author is going to have a whole collection of things that they're both excited about, but also things that they're like, I'm never going to do this again. So that's kind of interesting. I think that if you are a more seasoned author and you're starting a brand new book, give yourself the gift of going over what happened last time, going over the things that you learned, going over how your motivations are different this time, going over mistakes that were made and how they could be fixed in the future, going over the things that you thought were super rewarding and then the things that maybe are regrets. I think that all of those things can be super helpful to come back to that place of wonder and that place of possibility and fun. So I think definitely look back and see which lessons you learned, but also don't let those lessons define you, especially don't let any failures define you, and don't make any victories define you. So if you had a book that worked out really well and it sold really well, it was in a very specific genre, and then you wrote the next book that you had a blast writing, but it somehow wasn't as successful, at least not commercially, you might be tempted to go back to the subject or the style of book number one. And I'm saying, fair enough, that might be something that's worth doing, but also examine your real motivations. Examine if that's something that you really want to do because you think it's going to be rewarding to you for the ways that matter to you right now, or whether you're doing that out of fear of further failure or because of your ego, because you want to have better sales. Having better sales, that's fair enough. I get that. But just be really cognizant and really aware of why you're making the choices that you're making. So I know today was short and sweet. You still have another week before you pull that trigger. So if you were to do anything homework-wise to try to get yourself in the right spot for next week's podcast episode, I would just make sure that you know everything you need to know and that you're feeling everything you need to feel in order to feel a little bit more comfortable about pulling the trigger on this whole book thing. And if you're not brand new, I want you to think about what you want to happen this time. In an ideal world, I've got a new, fresh opportunity. How can I make that work for me? So that's it. Thank you so much for joining me on the How to Be an Author podcast. I look so forward to being with you next week as we talk about starting the right story in the right way.
If you have any pressing writing-related questions or would like to be featured on the How to Be an Author podcast, please feel free to reach out on my website, creativeandwritingcoach.com.